So this session's all about reputation. And so I am not going to steal the panelists' thunder. I'm going to let them all introduce themselves and give just a couple of minutes on what they think reputation means to them. Want to start?
Good afternoon, Stuart Osborne. I'm the Group Security Global for BAE Systems. Prior to that, I did 32 years in public service and policing and spent the last 5 of those heading up the UK policing intelligence and investigative approach to counter-terrorism in the UK and overseas. So my view of reputation comes from a bit of business and a bit from the public sector. And I think, in the crudest terms, there's 3 elements to reputation. And you can affect each of those slightly differently. The first one is the history that your organisation or you as an individual actually has. There's not much you can do about that because it's already out there and it's existing. The next bit is around the current activity that you're getting engaged with. And that normally comes once things have happened. But the most important bit for me about a reputation is the personal interaction that you have with the client, the customer, the person that you're actually delivering a service to. And those 3 things actually incrementally move backwards. I think you can do quite a lot with that personal engagement that will affect what that current atmosphere is around your reputation that will then in turn become history. Now, it's absolutely right that actually a moment can affect greatly what's done in the past, but actually being open, being honest and having the right ethics and morals with what you're actually doing goes a long way to reassure people we all make mistakes. I think people actually accept that the world is now so complicated, things are going to happen. But it's about how quickly you identify them, how quickly you admit them, and how quickly you put them right. That will actually be the key for reputation in the future.
Okay, great. John, do you want to take over?
I'm Bree. I'm a managing director at Deutsche Bank in corporate security and business continuity. I've been with Deutsche 3 years. Prior to that, I did 12 years with Citi, and I've been in this business for 40 years. Now, this is where you say, wow, you don't look that old. and I say, thank you. Well,
you don't look that old.
It's a tough crowd.
You're telling me, mate.
It's a rough bunch.
You're telling me.
I take back my argument, but you can see I'm kind of shy and reserved. But one of the things that, being in one of the largest investment banks in the world, and we're very proud of that, it's a privilege to work at DB. And we believe that, it's about culture. I mean, all of this starts with culture. And we have a tremendous program across it. And, we're like every other major institution, every major bank. There's guilt by association. I mean, we've all made some mistakes. And a lot of the things that the industry is accused of now happened a long time ago when it really wasn't illegal. But right or wrong, it's happening. The regulators have a job to do. And they really do a good job. I mean, they're there. They're trying to keep the playing field even. But culture is critical to us. And one of the programs that was started about 3 years ago at DB, you can see some of it online. It's called 2015 Plus. But there was a part of the culture that was very important. And I always write these down because I have them. I actually have them on my wall in my office. But there's really 6 values and beliefs. It's integrity, discipline, sustainability, client centricity, partnership. So that when you go through those are the 6 that we live by. The one that always gets me the most, and of course innovation is important, partnership is critical, but sustainability. It's not about just putting the program in place, it's not about having the policy, it's about living it and living those values. And we as managing directors are actually charged with getting out there and getting the message to the troops in everything we do. So that's kind of just a piece of it. It's important. We believe in reputational capital. We have to keep letting the world know that we're really a good organization, that we're part of commerce, we're there to keep things moving. So that's important to us to have capital. And the other thing you mentioned is getting out in front of something quick. If something happens, just get right out in front of it and accept the fact, tell the truth, and you have a good chance of surviving and coming back. You can lose your reputation. It is hard to build. But getting out in front and being honest is a critical piece of that, and that's part of our culture and our beliefs.
Absolutely. Jenny?
Yes, I'm Jenny Kalenderidis, and I work for RSA with the security division of EMC. And my role is to run the RSA's business in the UK and Ireland. And I think when we look at brand reputation, clearly we invest a lot in our brand. Our customers and people buy from us based on our brand credentials. And it's hard fought for. We spend a lot of time and money investing in it, but it can be very easily lost. And often at events like this, I feel like I have to stand up and put my hand up and say, I'm Jenny, I'm from RSA, and we were breached. But we did recover from it. And going back to both my colleagues here, speed of response and having a plan to respond and communicating very effectively is absolutely key. And also knowing what got nicked helps. And being able to demonstrate that to your customers, that you were on top of it and you did understand it, but you have been open and honest about it, was absolutely key for us in recovering from that breach.
Richard?
So I'm Richard Knowlton. I'm the Group Corporate Security Director in Vodafone, which means fundamentally I look after all the security aspects which are non-technical. Brian, as the CISO, is dealing with the network IT security aspects. And I agree with everything that's been said, and I now have the unhappy task of trying to add something. And I suppose what I would say is it's a lot about the kind of company you think you want to be, and this goes back to John's point, perhaps. And it was brought home very much for me a few years ago. I was on a Vodafone management course, and it was one of those management courses where we are expected to go and sample different sorts of retail experiences. Probably many of you have done this kind of thing. It gets you out of the office and into the shopping mall. The particular task that I was set was to go to a cosmetics counter and see what my experience in the retail sense was going to be like at that cosmetics centre. And the experience was wonderful. Young, attractive people behind the counter, selling attractive packaged products at a reasonable price, and everything went swimmingly. I bought far too much for my wife. Everything was wonderful, and I really felt well managed until I came to pay, when I was dropped like a hot brick. That is precisely not the kind of company that Vodafone wants to be. They were a company that relied on passing trade and didn't really care very much whether you came back another time because there was plenty of throughput maintaining their business. That is absolutely not our model. And to sustain our model, we need a high reputation, and particularly something I'm sure we're going to talk about, we need a relationship of trust with our customers.
Right, so just for reference, the tablets are working again, so start thinking of your nasty questions for everybody. So Jenny, you mentioned your little issuette a couple of years ago. How does brand protection and security kind of fit together? Is security really just a subset of brand protection for you guys?
To me, all of these discussions we've been having, and specifically around brand, it is about risk. It's having a good understanding of risk, and we're talking about reputational risk here and how you manage that. And it has to be part of your overall risk framework. I think risk management as a function has been seen often as an administrative back office function. But when you start thinking about security, you have to have a robust risk management model that's part of your overall strategy that's understood. The challenge has been that risk models up to now have been very inward-facing. They've been looking at things to some intents and purposes are within our own control, how we manufacture our goods and services, our customer services, functions and so on. And they can be quite slow-moving. When you start talking about reputational risk, suddenly that's outside the organisation, it's outside of your control, and it moves very fast. And I can tell you, having lived through what we did, it moves incredibly fast. So you need a risk model which isn't just looking backward or inward at a point in time through loads of spreadsheets. You need to include reputation and put a value around it as part of your risk register and monitor and work with it. And so I think those are certainly the lessons that we learned. We felt we had a very robust risk management function, but I think it has completely moved on to another dimension with what we went through.
So that was much more of an incident management function.
Yes, because once you are breached, you get into incident management or crisis management. And the other point I would make is you need to be ahead of that before it happens. Going into crisis management in a period like that is not where you want to be. So as part of your risk framework, you need a model that deals with incidents and allows you to assess them, and then to have a plan that swings in, which is predominantly about people, processes and technology, but a communication plan where everybody knows their role in that particular incident, and they can swing into action.
John, do you want to pick up on that?
Well, I mentioned earlier, about things that happen, were not illegal at the time, and I think how our industry has changed, and our co-chairman really emphasized that repeatedly. It's not about doing what's illegal; it's about doing what's right. See, that's where the direction of the industry, not only Deutsche Bank, but the industry is going. So that's one piece of it. The second piece is that you can't just have this culture of, of proper and right and so on, when it comes to just one aspect. It can't be about trades, or it can't be about loans, and it can't be about FX. It has to be embedded in the DNA. It's in everything you do. So if I see an off-color email, or if I see an email or I hear something, I say something. And we're trying to get people to do that. We're trying to make them understand that you have to make this part of your life. Again, it's a privilege to work there. So, we really have to embed this in the everyday email, IMs, and you all know, you see them. I mean, it's amazing what some people will actually write. I'm fascinated by what some people will write. And it's our job to go back to them. So that's part of it. It's really getting into it. And it's not something that just happens in a training session. It's every day. This is constant. So that's kind of, I think, that when you get right to the base of it, it all starts with the culture.
So you think that the culture of being respectful on email, not providing not having a different attitude is key to managing behaviours that contribute to cybersecurity risks?
Well, it does. I mean, it just gives people an understanding that they're working in an organization that is a good organization and does what's right. It's not, it's not only about legal. It's legal to do that, but it was the right thing to do. Mm-hmm. So I think you have to build that in, only because, it's a different world. I say this all the time. I'll leave, my kids. They're 26 and 21, I think. But they'll leave home without their clothes, but they'll never leave home without their iPhone. So the under 40 culture is completely different, and they're not afraid to share information. And, we're talking about protecting information, but everybody wants to tell everybody what they're doing. And I don't mean to hog the time, but I was in New York. I just got back, and I was listening to a radio station. It was the thing about the pictures on the iPhones that were hacked, Apple, and everybody was and a father called in, and he said, "I have a solution to prevent this from ever happening again." His answer was, camera. That's all he said. He said, camera. Think camera. But now, how many people have... I have cameras home. Nobody ever carries them. Everybody's taking pictures with their iPhones. Or their phones. Or their Vodafones. let me get that in here. The Vodafone iPhone. The Vodafone iPhone. So is that, we want to put it out there.
So
can't wait to tell someone.
There's an interesting corollary to that, isn't there? That you've got 3 or 4 generations of people in companies now who have very different views about what right is in terms of sharing information, in terms of their understanding of technology. How do you think one size fits all in terms of policies and processes, or how do you start to build things that are appropriate to those different groups?
Well, we're in 70 countries. When I was at Citibank, we were in 101 countries. Culture is completely different in Japan than it was in Sri Lanka, than it was in Indonesia. We had to deal with that. We had to design our programs to meet the needs of those people and respect their culture. But there is one cultural piece that cuts across everything. Most people are honest. I mean, the majority of people are honest. I say that all the time, and you take all the fraud that's happened, and there's a bunch of bankers in here, take all the fraud that's happened, compared to the amount of transactions that are conducted, it's a rounding error. Now, I'm not saying fraud is not critical. It's a very important piece. But when you think about the amount of calls that you people get through on a given day, it's mind-boggling. So it's hard to try and get that. A fellow named Tom Obermeyer once said that we're not looking for a needle in a stack of needles. We're looking for a needle in a stack of needles. Bad transactions look like the good transactions.
So Richard, do you want to...
No, just to pick up on that cultural point. I mean, it's nothing to do with anything that's been said, so it's probably useful. When the Anti-Bribery Act came in the UK, it was about 3 or 4 years ago, after we'd had death by consultancy for years about telling us how we should cope with it, I was given the task of going out to India to give an introduction to the implications of this new British legislation for our Indian market. And it was a room a little bit like this, and I was listened to, well, first of all, in deathly silence, and then increasingly angry looks. And in the question, it was all about, you do realise 1947 happened? Why are you, a Brit, coming here to tell us about your British law, which you want to apply to our business? It was an interesting kind of discussion, and I don't think any of us were prepared for that. Perhaps a couple of quick comments. The first comment that my group CEO ever made to me when I joined up was that you have an interesting balancing act, Richard, and it applies equally to Brian. First of all, you have to make sure that this company and its products are as tight as possible, while at the same time they have to be as easy to use and flexible as possible. Treading that balance is your task, and it's actually very difficult with modern technology.
So, I mean, all this talk about reputation is really about engendering trust in people. So, if I was going to purchase corporate services and I'm going to outsource something, how do you start to codify that trust so you can help make a business decision in a sensible way? Stuart, do you want to take that?
So just following on from the last one, my basic philosophy of security is about creating environments that allow people to get on with their business with a minimum of hindrance. And that's what security must be. Actually, if you get that right, people feel a lot more comfortable, which means they can get on with their business, which makes them more energetic, which means you make more profit, which is the bottom line in what you're trying to deliver in terms of doing business. And you can also become a differentiator and increase the profit margin by stopping some of those things going out the door or reducing the times that it happens and looking at things. But you've got that wealth of stuff that's coming at you all the time now, and the needle in a pile of needles. You need to do something that actually allows you to narrow your function down on the bits that really matter rather than concentrate with just everything. And the APT threat that comes through the door now, there is so much good stuff that can stop that. But what you actually need then is something that says where's the analysis behind that, and then where's the threat vectors and the intelligence that's coming on afterwards. So when you're sort of trying to get trust in people, I think you need to first of all know your business really well, and then you need to understand their business in a way that you can provide the solution that is actually going to take them forward. And Richard talked about, consultants coming in. So often consultants want to come in and sell you their product. It's about actually understanding what the need is, which goes back to a really good threat and risk assessment to say, where are your crown jewels? Where are the bits that really matter? What do you want to do, both in terms of the physical, the electronic, the personal threats? Because as John will say, Snowden, he'll talk about that in a minute, I'm actually sure, we can spend a lot of time dealing with chasing the football because it's the latest thing, but you can't forget about those other things that have happened in the past.
I think the other thing I would add to that, we've talked about crown jewels being here, but it's also understanding who wants to attack you and why. What have you got that they want? We've all got things people want, and that intelligence piece is really about understanding why might somebody want to attack you and how are they going to attack you. And I think Ray mentioned it earlier on, that intelligence sharing model, which we still are pretty weak at as a various different industries, business, cross-functionally, but intelligence sharing in all its guises is absolutely important because I think Ray again mentioned we're not kind of beating the criminals. If we want to try and keep this cat and mouse game of staying one step ahead, we need to have that intelligence. But we have to start by understanding who wants to attack us, why do they want to attack us, how are they going to do it, and try and stay one step ahead of the game. And I suspect everybody in this room has read the Verizon data breach report, and what I think is really interesting about that is that, there's a number of interesting things, but one was the key attack vectors that are out there have been ones that we've all known about for quite a long time now. They're kind of old hat phishing, but it's still really effective and efficient. And, those that will attack us have become very organised, they've become very patient, they've become very well funded. And the other stat in that report that I found very interesting as well was we've started to see the shift change from just fraud to espionage. The espionage attacks are increasing, and those are well funded, they take time, they're slow, and they will do their kind of reconnaissance and their due diligence, and that's exactly what happened to us. So those are the things we need to get our arms around and understand.
And Richard, do you want to talk a little bit about trust?
Well, I mean, just a comment on Jenny's point. I mean, the cynic in me as an old intelligence hand is that it's been going on forever. It's just that after Snowden, perhaps it's becoming more obvious. We know more about the techniques that are used. I think if we're talking about trust, for me, fundamentally, trust doesn't exist without relationships. I think we are very lucky, those of us who are security professionals, that we operate to a very high degree in relationships of trust with the sorts of people who are in this room, for example. And I'm quite sure that if I spent a day talking to each of you, I'd learn at least as much from you as vice versa, even about perhaps my own business. So the fact that with our customers, with the security professionals in those customers, we can work very closely because there's very little competitive insecurity. There are some areas around fraud and statistics, for example, that might be. But generally speaking, we can start on a very good basis of trust, which will then develop over time as we speak to security professionals in the other companies. Then it's the job on each side to make sure that that trust kind of percolates up into the business.
I mean, John, your board must really understand your customer trust. Customer trust is critical to your business.
It's our business. I mean, anybody that's in the financial business, I mean, it is your business. People entrust you with a lot of money, and they entrust you to make transactions for them. And there is competition out there, and it's a good industry. I mean, they're all good. The banks are good. They've gotten better. But a couple of things. One is you mentioned about vendors. I mean, they call it the supply chain. I call it the support chain. What's happening is we'll spend a lot of time looking at tier 1 vendors, but then we're not looking at tier 2s and tier 3s. And you have tier 1s hiring tier 2s. You know, and you have to start paying attention to that, because the regulators, rightfully so, are coming to us and saying, if you're going to use a vendor, that's fine, but you have to know who they are, and they must operate under the same values that you operate under. So we spend a lot of time in that supply chain or the support chain. The other piece of it is, I think, Richard, you said it well, with how we separate the functions. We're corporate security and business continuity. So in addition to the traditional security, we run resiliency and crisis management, intelligence, and BCM, and so on and so forth. But we are joined at the hip with our CISO team. I mean, we're just constantly in stuff together. And it's that kind of a relationship that has really gotten better. We had a brilliant CISO, a fellow named Ralph Reimenschnitter, he's off the charts smart. And Ralph is really pushing this. So we work on things together, and we'll be on conference calls and talking about someone, and all of a sudden I'll get an email and he'll say, what do you? And we'll go back and forth, and you start to work stuff together, because we all have that common goal. Everybody in the room has the exact same goal. We want to be successful and serve our customers, and make money. And there's the old saying, crime doesn't pay, right? Well, we're doing pretty good.
Seems to.
Without crime, there'd be nobody in this room. The problem is the bad guys are having the same meeting somewhere today. and they don't have to worry about laws and rules and regulations.
Compliance.
And they don't have to put a budget through, and they don't have audits, right?
But they're not getting cupcakes either.
Well, they're getting our cupcakes.
And the thing in that for me was about that subcontracting chain, and you can't outsource your reputational risk, and yet we still see people trying to do that. I mean, how do you think we need to change the way we talk about this stuff so people really understand it? Jenny, do you want to try and take that one?
I do still think there is an overall sense of everyone thinks they outsource a responsibility. So if you think about consumers, for example, we demand that our banks keep us safe, that our phone provider keeps us safe, that our network provider keeps us safe, and so on. As employees, we expect our company to keep us safe. As suppliers, we expect the suppliers to keep us safe. And I think within organisations, we expect the security department to keep us safe. So there is still this sense of it's somebody else's responsibility, and that's what you really have to address. Security isn't security anymore. It's something that permeates the whole organisation. And so that joined up piece is absolutely key. But it has to go outside your organisation as well, to your partners, your suppliers, your customers, everybody. And so that's the piece I think we still struggle with.
Stuart, do you want to pick that up?
Yeah, I think security is a bit like product development. It's changing all the time, and you need to be looking for what's over the horizon without forgetting what actually happened in the past. And you need to let people know that actually what we told you yesterday is still important, but now there's something else that's happening. So quite often in businesses, especially franchised bits of businesses that are bringing lots of things together, will actually just want to concentrate on what they've done and a lot of online training, and it sort of becomes, I've ticked the box, I can now move on and forget about that. And it's keeping it in the front of everybody's mind all the time. And also that supply chain that's actually coming up behind, that how much of our information is actually held by somebody else, how we're controlling what they're doing and the access their people have got. The world is just so complex now. It used to be if you put a wall around something, people couldn't get in. Now, actually, then it went to, actually, you need to protect the computer that you're working on. Then you've got removable drives. Then you had your remote station that was looking at it. Now you've got the cloud. So not only has the threat changed, but the geographical area from which you're going to be attacked has changed as well. And you just need to keep refreshing what that looks like.
So, Richard, your supply chain must be incredibly complicated across all markets. you operate?
It is a complex issue to deal with because we have a big procurement company based in Luxembourg. I don't know what their budget is, but their turnover must, I suspect, be in the hundreds of millions, if not the billions per year. Everything from the guys who are providing the loo paper in the offices right through to those people who are providing highly sophisticated infrastructure. And driving security through that is absolutely essential. We can't outsource it, of course we can't. The most obvious example of that would be high-tech infrastructure. We have Far Eastern suppliers who are controversial in some countries. We put a huge amount of effort into managing that with them and without them. And similarly, really starting with normal risk management procedures, identifying, well, probably the guy who's providing the loo paper is not your highest risk, but on the other hand, if that person has a messenger who has access to the office out of hours, well, perhaps there is a risk. Very careful analysis of the risks around suppliers, and then, of course, making sure that there is a strong and complied with security component in the contracts we develop with those suppliers. But it's challenging, there's no doubt about that.
Mm. So, we're talking about attacks a lot, people attacking the organisation, the impact that will have on the brand. So in order to try and understand how that market works, how do you think the barrier to entry for launching an attack's changed over the last few years? Stuart, do you want to take that one to start with?
I think I touched on it slightly a little bit before. It's just a lot broader now. Mm-hmm. And actually they're combining it. So actually you need to look across all those various disciplines and see how they're working together. But at the same point, actually we've got a lot cleverer at managing some of those threats and risks. So actually identifying stuff that comes from your phone or your tablet up to the web, where are you actually going to have that point that you can interject to stop things actually happening? And it comes back to this risk and threat assessment once again, is where are you most vulnerable? What do you need to protect it? And then once you've protected it, how are you going to monitor it to make sure that that's doing the right job and looking for the next avenue that's coming forward?
So John, I imagine people invest to try and defraud you.
Of course.
What kind of market effect do you think that's having?
I mean, that's their job. I mean, they're bad guys. That's what they do. There's a line from a movie, I'm a criminal, that's what I do. You know, but one of the challenges that we face, and you know, I've been blessed in my career, but many years ago, 2000, when we were just starting with online banking, when it was really coming back, and I was with Citi, and we put out a great online banking program. I worked for a woman named Maura Marcus, who was the CEO, a brilliant woman, and Catherine Palmieri. And they brought the fraud team and the compliance team into the system design life cycle at conception. We sat at the table when they said, you know, here's what we're thinking about doing. What do you guys think? And we said, well, that's cool. We can build some controls in. And it was a lesson to be learned. I mean, it was we were part of it, and our responsibility was right then and there. So we, on security, we must be at the front of the system design life cycle. If we're not involved in step one, I mean, the challenges that you guys face on the technology side is overwhelming. I mean, you have my respect. That's it. And the other thing is that our goal is to get as much out there to our customers as fast as we can. You know, we want people sitting here on their iPads doing trades. You know, we want people banking because we make money on transactions. You guys make money on phone calls. The object is for me to get that call through as fast as I possibly can, right, hitting as few buttons as I possibly can. So we have to be part of that. We have to understand that. And someone said earlier to me about enabling. That's what we do. We enable the business.
Yep. So, Jenny, sorry, Richard.
Sorry, just to comment on that, but absolutely agree with John. That there is, or can be, in some companies that I've seen, a cultural issue because security is still seen in the old-style security sense, the people who say no, the blockers, the people who slow everything down. Now, that is very much old-style, and I think most modern multinationals these days are light years away from it. But you still can see a resistance to security by design, which John quite rightly emphasized, that don't let those security people anywhere near this. They'll only slow it down. They'll put in complication. If we're in at the beginning, we don't add complication. Absolutely. If you try and bring us in later, we're going to cause you problems.
So, Jenny, have you seen the attack marketplace change over the last couple of years?
Well, I think, as I mentioned before, I think the attack vectors that we're seeing are now well known and understood, but they're still being effective. And so our role is really to understand them in as much detail as we can. I think that the fraudsters or the organised gangs or whoever it is, they're very well organised. And we talk about that a lot. We know that. They have their own supply chain. They have broken that down. But it comes back to everything we've talked about, really having a robust risk framework and understanding what impact that's going to have on your reputation if you do get attacked and so on. And often it's really understanding the type of data that you have and what the risk around that data is. You can broadly put data into two buckets. Custodial data that you're given to protect. Generally, that's personal identifiable data, customer details, and so on. And we hear a lot about companies that get breached, like Target and so on, but very few have gone out of business as a result of that sort of breach. The ones we don't hear so much about, and this is more, as I referred to, the kind of espionage side, is really around IP data. If you're a drug company, you've invested multiple billions in creating a new drug, and that gets hacked and so on, you can go out of business overnight. So again, there isn't one size fits all to this discussion. It's really understanding what have you got, who wants to get it, how are you protecting it, and then understanding the various different attack vectors that might get that, and getting that intelligence in there, building a robust framework.
I think that's a really important thing to just make sure everybody gets, that you think more about what's the impact.
Yep.
And then who might do it to me.
Exactly.
I think that's common to all of you by the sounds of things. I think that's a really important thing. It's not the sexy, it's the nation state, it's the cyber criminals. It's how's it going to hurt me, and then who might do it to me.
Yeah, they get a lot of publicity, nation states and so on, but it's really what is the impact, and that comes back always to that, might sound quite dull, but a risk discussion, and we've got to really get our arms around that and build systems and processes to manage that first before we do anything else.
So we've got a question from the audience, and please, everybody, tablets are working. This is proof. Type something. Which I think I'm going to throw to Richard first, because it's about knowing where most electronic equipment's manufactured. How can we ensure the integrity of the systems, given that we can't be sure the hardware's not tampered with?
I can't imagine what he's got in mind when he's asked this question. And Ian is exactly the person to answer the question. How can I put this diplomatically? Is this on the record or off the record?
There's a camera there, so I'd be careful.
It's on the record. Okay. Inevitably, there are certain companies in certain countries that produce very effective equipment at a very good price. And again, one of the first things my CEO said to me when I joined, because this at that point was a hot topic, was, Richard, don't ever come to me and tell me you can't use a particular supplier, but I can't tell you why. And you might be able to read between the lines of that particular statement. I think in the particular case, which is probably being referred to, there are a number of things which we are doing, both independently as a company. So, for example, with a supplier where we feel there is a high degree of risk, the first thing that I've done is to engage with the security department of that company and have a very frank conversation, and a very frank conversation which repeats every 6 months about exactly what they're doing on the security side to reassure us about security integrity and so on, and exactly the way that we are viewing them, because we read the press, we hear what governments are saying about them and so on. So we do that as a company on our own account. But very often, and this doesn't just apply to Vodafone or to the UK, we'll also, of course, be having a conversation with the government and the specialist agencies in that country about the risk posed by a particular supplier. So have I said that in a roundabout enough way that people understand while I haven't said anything?
Never seen you squirm like that. It was quite an experience. So I'll
yes, you have a much better handle on this.
So I can say some of the names. So here's a question. So is place of manufacture really that important? So if I take, for the sake of argument, Huawei and Cisco, and I compare them objectively, what's the actual difference? So Huawei manufacture in China, and Cisco manufacture in China, but then assemble somewhere else. And they do that because of the American Trade Agreements Act, which says if you're going to sell to the federal government, you have to substantially transform in one of these countries, and China's not on the list. So they build all the boards and the chassis in China, ship them over somewhere, and stick them together. And if you are buying for the federal government of the US from Cisco, it comes out of Venezuela. So for Huawei, I've got manufacture and build in China. For Cisco, I've got manufacture in China and build in Venezuela. Is there really any difference there? Really? But the one that gets me is the software development, and I love this one. So Cisco develop in the US, China and India, and Huawei develop in China and India. And so the US is the only difference, right? So what does that buy me? Well, it turns out there's a thing called the Immigration and Naturalization Act in the US that says it's illegal for a US company to hold the nationality of someone who has a right to work in order to differentiate against them. So if I go to Cisco and say, how many evil 3PLA Chinese implants do you have working in the US? It's illegal for them to know. So what have I actually bought? Right? So this is not the supply chain stuff, and Richard alluded to it. It's a very, very complicated thing to work through, but it's not as simple as where's it made and, you know, to be racist, what colour are the people that build it? It's much more complicated than that, and it's about really understanding what you want a piece of equipment to do and what promises it's making, and not putting all of your trust in a single piece of equipment.
And the other element of that, Ian, was that this is a kind of pre-Snowden conversation. Because we would have had a tendency to have a greater degree of trust in something manufactured in the US, or at least manufactured by a US company, than by a Chinese company, to quote an example at random. But then with Snowden, I think that has changed the playing field. Because whereas we might have regarded certain people as the good guys in the past, we can't automatically, at least from a Vodafone perspective, when they might be doing things which will cause us severe reputational damage if they come out, people who are good guys in principle are actually involved in that sort of activity. It's increasingly difficult.
Any of the panel want to comment on international supply chain issues?
I think it's very difficult because you don't always know the end of the supply chain, and it goes back to that visibility piece again in intelligence. You know, we all have a duty of care to understand where all of those elements are. Right back to the, you know, it's a little bit, it reminds me a little bit of that discussion of, you know, food that we're all obsessed with in this country and a huge number of cooking programs, but, you know, where is what you're eating being grown? It's the same sort of piece. Again, that's not a pure security discussion. That is a strategy discussion with the company, and, you know, and has to be a board level discussion about, and how does that impact your brand? You know, that you are taking something that's been manufactured in Venezuela, let's say.
So this is the horse meat lasagna for telecoms.
Yes, could be the horse meat lasagna for telecoms.
Part of the challenge is, and I think Jenny said it, we've become too compartmentalized. In other words, it's end-to-end testing. It's end-to-end responsibility. It's end-to-end integrity validation. You have to know from wherever that product starts being made to where it's going to wind up, and every piece along there you're responsible to understand. Is it a challenge? Of course it's a challenge. But if we're going to outsource, we have to do that. We also have to get people away from, you know, I'm isolated. I look at this one little piece. Well, you got to do a lot more regression testing when you make changes. Because a lot of the major losses have been accidents. Yeah. I mean, when you think about it, right? I mean, the person who, you know, the fax server goes bad and all of a sudden 100, you know, documents with your personal information on it are being sent to the wrong company. Nobody did that intentionally. But the problem is someone made a change to one little component of that program, and they never ran a test to say, well, let me try putting this through. Is it really going to get to you? And we don't do regression testing.
And there is that bit around trying to find out when things go wrong as soon as possible. So if you've got something that is absolutely critical to your business or to your product, then what my company does, it will actually test that individual bit and see if it works. And every now and again, you come up with something that is not a security threat, but is a manufacturing failure that has crept through the system because people make mistakes. But that allows you to actually maintain your brand, your reputation. And actually, the next time somebody sends something, just a little bit more careful around what comes through the doors for you, because they don't want you going to another supplier.
So I'm afraid I'm going to have to draw it to a close there. But thank you all for your interaction. Please help me thanking the panel again. And on that, I will hand over to Brian to wrap up.